in not recognizing that. And so people like me are just waiting to have attrition, to make sure that the older people retire and go off, and then to bring down the average age. I have discussed this several times with the Secretary General. And the problem with the UN is that it is not easy to get rid of Secretariat staff. You have great career permanence in the UN. Once you are in, you are not easy to throw out. And so the Secretary General repeats to me every time that we just have to wait for these older people to retire and die. And I keep telling him that I hope that they die before I die, because I want to see a younger UN and not a perpetually older UN all the time. So the only strategy is not to renew contracts and to insist that people retire on their due age, which is 60 or 62. Over to you for a second question.
Can I answer that one too? Can I just chime in just very briefly here too? I believe that another successful way that we should be moving and are not moving completely in the same step is with mentoring. We have been talking, Dr. Murphy and I particularly, about fellowships, about creating long-term possibilities for young people to be trained in UN methods and the structure of the UN, etc., in places like Costa Rica, where we'll be doing the program together, the development program. But I think that one of the ways these youth fellowships could be sponsored and mentoring can go forward is by involving corporations, which is kind of a no-no at the UN. Aside from members of the Global Compact, there are not many corporations who are invited into the UN process so that the UN is not corrupted by money. The problem with tainted money often is that there taint enough of it. We really need to untaint some money. And we look at large, what did the Rolling Stone magazine call Goldman Sachs, the squid, the giant squid? I think we need to be able to bring corporations that may have these tainted backgrounds into our process to sponsor fellowships and mentorships so that civil society, the United Nations Secretariat, and the permanent missions can all find ways, each one of them can find ways to invite more young people into the process of leadership transition, which is not something that is happening very well in any of the areas that I just mentioned, any of those three areas.
I'm sorry, do we have a second question from Forum?
No, we don't.
Okay.
Okay. Can we then get a quick question from Nihai, a short question for a short answer?
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for this opportunity. My question is, how is the UN handling heavy censorship in countries such as China? And how can the youth from these countries participate if they don't have all the relative information?
Please be very careful about reaching facile judgments about China. China is 5,000 years of recorded civilization and history. 5,000 years. China is a country that has managed to pull itself up by its own bootstraps. The Chinese study, they work 18 hours a day, they save money, they reinvest 20% of their earnings, and therefore they show a growth rate of 10% even at a time of recession. These are not minor achievements. I have been visiting China since 1958. Even in 1958, when it was a total developing country, I never saw a child anywhere in China without shoes. That is an extraordinary achievement for any developing country. So please do not focus too much on the media's view of China. China has its own civilization, and it just so happens that fundamental to Chinese civilization is something called Confucianism. In Confucianism, the key actor is not the individual, but society at large. And so, whereas in the West, the concept of human rights is based on the rights of the individual, in Confucianism, human rights are based on the rights of society as a whole. It's a different way of looking at human rights, and neither of these two ways is better than the other. It's just that there are two different ways. One looks at the individual as the center of the world, and the other looks at society as the center of the world. And so freedom, what you call freedom, for me, freedom is a question of raising your standard of living. And I'm afraid the Chinese have managed to raise their standard of living better than other countries in the world. So let us not pass easy judgment on China. There's much that we have to learn from China, and the essence must be tolerance of opinion and a willingness to learn. Do you want to add something?
Yes, like the ambassador, I have visited China often. I just came back from Asia, and I'm going back again in a couple of weeks. I think we need to be careful how the U.S. media has portrayed China. Remember, the U.S. media has become extremely biased over the last 10 years, and I wouldn't trust it as much as I trusted it perhaps a decade ago. I'm with young people from China every day. I'm with several on MSN this morning, and I find complete and utter transparency with Chinese young people. Come to the Youth Assembly at the United Nations. You'll certainly meet, as I said, about 100 people your age from China who are free thinkers. China certainly is going through its own transitions right now, but there are a couple of things to remember. Certainly Ambassador Kamal has pointed out some very important ones. Secondly, I would like to also add that 400 million people in China speak English fluently, making China the largest English-speaking country in the world. China has 200 million more English speakers than the United States, just to give you some perspective there. The idea of me speaking at a conference on social entrepreneurship in China, which is very aspirational, as I mentioned, a sort of personal way for you to create a better world as well as creating a better income for yourself, is a very prominent idea there. We heard recently that Google was hacked into by Chinese forces, and that's really gotten us a little worried. On the one hand, it seems that the New York Times is now reporting that Google was perhaps tapped into by elements within the former Soviet Union through China. So it's very murky as to whether China was even involved in that at all. And that should be thought about. I mean, certainly Avatar, for instance, maybe there's a guilty conscience there, but many in the Chinese government believe that Avatar is a knock against China, which is very odd because I don't think most of us who've seen it think that it is. And Avatar is running in 3D in China everywhere, but it's way too expensive for the Chinese people, and Avatar in 2D, which the Chinese people could afford to see, has been banned. So there is this kind of quasi-banning situation going on, but it is certainly an emerging country that is beginning to test the limits of its own borders and boundaries.
Over to Vancouver for a quick question from Vancouver. Vancouver.
Are you still celebrating the victory?
Is Vancouver online?
Yeah, my question is like throughout the conference, we have been talking about bringing youth from different countries to improve economies of developing nations. My question is, what are we doing to bring youth from countries where tense situations are going on right now? Let's say India and Pakistan, North Korea and South Korea, and many more. And lessen the tense situations in the hearts of youth to have friendly future for these countries.
Let me take this first. You know that there are three major zones of tension